March 7, 1945. Cologne, Germany. The graphite pencil trembled slightly in Sergeant Jim Warrington's hand as he recorded the encounter in his unit log. Words that would have seemed impossible just 12 months earlier, when experienced tank instructors had openly questioned whether American armor could effectively engage the feared German Panthers while on the move. Outside his command hatch, the acrid smell of cordite hung in the cold morning air as his crew reloaded the 90mm M3 gun of their T26E3 Pershing tank. The Germans would learn to fear American mobility. We have discovered something they cannot counter. Through the periscope sight, smudged with diesel residue, he had just watched his platoon execute a maneuver that contradicted every assumption about armored combat doctrine inherited from the First World War. Instead of halting to establish a firing position, his tanks had maintained a constant forward speed of 15.7 km/h, their stabilized gun systems absorbing the chassis vibration just enough to place accurate fire on target. The Panther never registered the true threat. One moment the German tank was traversing its turret toward what it assumed would be stationary American armor, and the next moment the 90mm armor-piercing shell was punching through its glacis plate from a tank that appeared to violate the fundamental principles of gunnery. The mathematics of armored supremacy were being rewritten not in armor thickness or gun caliber, but in the devastating physics of a 46-ton tank maintaining offensive momentum while delivering accurate fire. Then using that continuous movement to rapidly reposition before German gunners could establish proper sight picture. Warrington's tank had destroyed 2 Panthers that morning using these tactics, earning commendation from battalion command for actions protecting the infantry advance across the Rhine bridgehead. The transformation had begun months earlier, on September 19, 1944, when the 3rd Armored Division first experimented with firing their Sherman tanks while moving at low speeds during the push through the Siegfried Line. The tankers were understandably skeptical. They had trained extensively on conventional doctrine that required coming to a complete halt before firing the main gun. At nearly 35 tons fully combat loaded in standard configuration, the M4A3E8 Sherman, with its enhanced horizontal volute spring suspension, was still expected to follow the established stop-to-fire protocols that dated back to the interwar years. Critics called it tactical suicide. Detractors insisted it was a recipe for wasted ammunition. Experienced tankers who had survived brutal engagements in the Normandy bocage openly questioned whether crews could achieve meaningful accuracy while traversing broken terrain at combat speeds. Among the doubters was Lieutenant Robert Franklin Davis, fresh from tank school and terrified he would die in his first week of combat. His personal accounts, documented in multiple post-war interviews, and his memoir co-written with Howard Blakely, would chronicle one of the most dramatic transformations in armored warfare history. The journey from skepticism to mastery began at Aberdeen Proving Grounds in Maryland, where engineers had installed early prototypes of the gyroscopically stabilized elevation mechanisms that permitted the gun to maintain horizontal position even as the tank chassis pitched forward and backward across uneven terrain. The system's initial tests showed hit probabilities improved from 12% to 37% while moving at 10 MEP, a statistical leap that could rewrite the calculus of tank versus tank engagements. By March 1945, American tank crews were routinely achieving first-round hits while moving at speeds approaching 20 MEP, transforming previous doctrine and achieving kill ratios against German armor that approached 1.7 to 1, a dramatic reversal from the 0.5 to 1 ratios experienced during the brutal summer fighting of 1944. When American tanks faced Panthers and Tigers in the Norman hedgerows. Warrington closed his logbook, the graphite smudging his fingers. The lessons being written in blood and steel across the German plains would forever change armored warfare. June 6, 1944. Normandy, France. The Sherman's engine shrieked as Staff Sergeant Michael Whitman pushed the accelerator to the floor, desperately seeking cover behind a hedgerow. The 75mm shell from his tank's main gun had just bounced harmlessly off the angled front plate of a German Panther, leaving nothing but a small scorch mark on the enemy's immaculate paint. Through his commander's periscope, Whitman watched in horror as the Panther's long 75mm KWK-42 gun tracked his movement with methodical precision. The German tank paused, settled its suspension, and fired. The armor-piercing round punched through the Sherman's frontal armor like paper, igniting ammunition stored in ready racks. 4 of the 5 crew members perished inside the burning coffin of steel. Whitman alone escaped through the commander's hatch, his uniform partially ablaze. This scenario repeated itself across the Norman landscape with devastating regularity during the summer of 1944. American tank battalions were experiencing catastrophic losses against German heavy armor, with kill-to-loss ratios frequently reaching 4-1 in favor of the Germans. The M4A3 Sherman, weighing 33.4 tons in combat configuration, carried frontal armor measuring just 2.5 inches at its thickest point. Its 75mm M3 gun could penetrate only 3.1 inches of armor at 500 yards, woefully inadequate against the Panther's 3.5-inch sloped glacis plate, which effectively doubled its protective value through angle mathematics. The disparity extended beyond protection to offensive capability. The Panther's high-velocity 75mm gun could penetrate 5.7 inches of armor at 1,000 yards, allowing it to destroy American tanks well beyond the Sherman's effective combat range. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, commanding the 37th Tank Battalion, documented the desperate situation in his after-action report on June 29, 1944. Our current doctrine is tactically obsolete against German armor. When we halt to fire as trained, we present predictable targets. German tanks can strike us from beyond our effective range, forcing engagements on their terms. We must develop new methods or face unacceptable losses. The German Panther had been developed as a direct response to encountering the Soviet T-34, combining sloped armor with high-velocity guns and excellent optics. Its design prioritized 3 critical factors: protection through slope mathematics rather than brute thickness, firepower capable of first-round kills at extended ranges, and precision through superior Zeiss optics and mechanical stabilization. By contrast, American Sherman development had prioritized reliability, manufacturing simplicity, and transport compatibility, qualities that ensured quantity but sacrificed armor protection and gun performance. Combat reports from the 2nd Armored Division revealed the tactical disadvantage in stark statistical detail. Average engagement distances against Panthers reached 875 yards, while effective Sherman penetration remained below 750 yards. This 125-yard death zone meant American tanks frequently found themselves under devastating fire without the ability to effectively respond. The traditional stop-to-fire doctrine exacerbated this disparity. A stationary Sherman required 3.5 seconds to settle its suspension, allowing the gunner to acquire the target, while German optics and training permitted accurate fire in under 2 seconds, an advantage measured in fractions of time but paid for in American lives. Captain James Burton of the 761st Tank Battalion described the psychological impact. You could hear the distinctive sound when enemy rounds struck our armor but failed to penetrate. A sharp metallic clang followed by a scraping noise as the shell deflected. But when their rounds penetrated, there was only a sudden thump, then flames. We began counting seconds between stopping and firing, knowing each fraction increased our vulnerability. Some crews simply refused to stop moving. By July 1944, with casualty rates in armoured units reaching unsustainable levels, the desperate need for tactical innovation was clear. Either American tanks would develop methods to offset German advantages, or they would continue to burn across the European theatre at rates that threatened the entire campaign timeline. September 14, 1944. Aberdeen Proving Ground, Maryland. The rain fell in sheets across the muddy test range as engineers from Army Ordnance huddled under canvas tarps, clipboards protected inside rubberized covers. They were witnessing something remarkable. The M4A3E8 Sherman tank, modified with the newly installed M4 gyroscopic gun stabilizer system, moved across the uneven terrain at 12 miles per hour. Inside the tank, Sergeant William Deering gripped the gunner controls, his right eye pressed against the rubber eyepiece of the sight. "Fire when ready," came the command through his headset. The stabilizer system consisted of an electric motor and hydraulic pump weighing just 37 pounds, connected to an oil-filled cylinder that automatically adjusted the gun's elevation as the tank pitched forward and backward. The gun maintained a relatively constant horizontal position despite the tank's movement over the rutted field. Deering squeezed the firing trigger. The 75mm shell struck the target silhouette 600 yards away. Not in the center, but close enough to have disabled a real Panther tank. The observers scribbled notes furiously. This was the fourth successful hit out of 11 attempts while moving at speed, a 36% hit probability that defied traditional armored doctrine. Colonel Bruce Clark of the 4th Armored Division had discovered this capability almost by accident during a training exercise 1 month earlier. As his tank traversed a shallow creek, the gunner had instinctively fired at a surprise target that appeared on their flank. To everyone's amazement, the round struck the wooden silhouette despite the tank's forward movement at nearly 8 miles per hour. "Do that again," Clark had ordered, curiosity piqued by what conventional wisdom said was impossible. After 5 more attempts yielded 3 hits, Clark contacted Army Ordnance immediately. "I believe we've found something that could change everything," he reported by field telephone. Testing expanded rapidly through late September. Engineers collected data on hit probabilities at various speeds and distances. At ranges under 700 yards, crews achieved hit rates of 30 to 40%, while moving at 10 to 15 miles per hour. Beyond 800 yards, accuracy dropped sharply, but even the limited capability represented a tactical revolution. Not everyone embraced the discovery. Major Leonard Harmon, a tank instructor with 5 years of experience, watched the test with obvious skepticism. "This violates everything we know about tank gunnery," he remarked to Clark. "You're asking crews to unlearn their entire training." "I'm asking them to survive," Clark responded, his voice level but firm. "German tanks are killing our boys because we make perfect targets when we stop." The technical challenges were substantial. The early M4 stabilizer only controlled the gun's vertical movement, not the horizontal traverse. Gunners had to master a new technique of tracking targets by steering the entire tank rather than rotating the turret while moving. This required seamless coordination between driver and gunner, a complex skill that demanded intensive training. Another problem emerged during extended testing. The stabilizer system worked best on relatively flat terrain at constant speeds. When tanks accelerated or decelerated sharply, the system couldn't compensate quickly enough, creating periods of extreme inaccuracy. Despite these limitations, the potential was undeniable. Captain James Leach, who supervised the testing program, documented hit percentages improving daily as crews adapted to the new technique. What seemed impossible on day 1 became routine by day 14, he noted in his official report. By early October, the first field tests under combat conditions were authorized. 3 Sherman tanks equipped with production stabilizers were assigned to the 2nd Armored Division near Aachen, Germany. Their first engagement occurred on October 11th, when the modified tanks encountered 3 Panzer IV tanks at a range of 600 yards. Moving at 12 miles per hour across an open field, the lead Sherman scored a direct hit on the commander's Panzer with its second shot. The German tanks, following doctrine, had halted to return fire, exactly the predictable behavior the new American tactics sought to exploit. 2 German tanks were destroyed. The 3rd retreated. No American tanks were lost. The message sent to Army Ground Forces headquarters was terse but historic. Rolling fire techniques successful in combat. Request immediate expansion of program. November 18, 1944. Hürtgen Forest, Germany. The tactical directive arrived at battalion headquarters in a mud-spattered jeep, the driver's uniform still wet from crossing the swollen Roa River. Captain Lawrence Wilson, operations officer for the 743rd Tank Battalion, unfolded the mimeographed pages and read them twice before summoning his company commanders. The document, titled Tactical Employment of Stabilized Fire Control During Forward Movement, formalized what innovative crews had been experimenting with for weeks. "Gentlemen," Wilson began, "this changes everything about how we engage German armor." The new doctrine called for a fundamental shift in crew procedures. Instead of the traditional stop, stabilize, acquire, fire sequence that had dominated tank gunnery since 1918, crews would now maintain continuous movement at 8 to 15 miles per hour while engaging targets. The commander would identify the target, the gunner would track using the modified stabilizer, and the driver would maintain steady speed without sudden acceleration or deceleration that would disrupt aim. Practical implementation required intensive training. Tank crews spent 10 days in rear areas, practicing the synchronized movements required for effective rolling fire. Gunners learned to anticipate the cyclic oscillation pattern of the stabilizer, timing their shots for moments when the gun passed through the optimal firing position. Drivers mastered the technique of making subtle steering adjustments to assist in target tracking rather than relying solely on turret traverse. Commanders developed a new language of concise commands that conveyed speed, direction, and target information simultaneously. Technical modifications accompanied the doctrinal change. The M4's gun stabilizer received an upgraded hydraulic dampener that reduced oscillation by 37%. Gunners' sights were retrofitted with enhanced vertical reference lines that helped compensate for lateral movement during firing. Lead computing devices, primitive analog calculators, helped gunners estimate proper lead distances for targets moving perpendicular to the tank's path. First Lieutenant Andrew Carrigan's platoon achieved the first documented successful engagement using the fully developed rolling fire technique on December 7, 1944. Near the town of Düren, his 5 Sherman tanks encountered 3 Panther tanks at 700 yards across an open field. Following the new protocol, Carrigan's tanks maintained 12 mph movement in a staggered formation, forcing the German tanks to track multiple moving targets simultaneously. The Panthers, following their doctrine, halted to establish stable firing platforms. This momentary pause proved fatal. 2 Shermans concentrated fire on the lead Panther, scoring hits while continuing to move. The German tank commander, Oberfeldwebel Kurt Hannemann, later described his confusion. "I could not understand why they didn't stop to shoot. Our gunner kept adjusting aim as they moved, but never established a proper sight picture. Then our turret was struck before we could fire." Statistical analysis from engagements between December 1944 and January 1945 showed remarkable improvement. Sherman tanks using rolling fire techniques achieved a 1.2 to 1 kill ratio against Panthers, a dramatic reversal from earlier catastrophic losses. Colonel James Polk of the 3rd Armored Division noted in his January field report, "Continuous movement has transformed our tactical effectiveness. German gunners trained to engage stationary targets are struggling to adapt to our new methods." The psychological impact extended beyond improved hit probabilities. German tank commanders, intercepted in signals intelligence, expressed growing frustration at American unpredictability. Panzer Group West's tactical bulletin dated January 17, 1945, advised, "American tanks no longer follow predictable engagement patterns. They maintain movement during firing, complicating range estimation and lead calculation." By February 1945, the rolling fire technique had spread throughout American armored units in the European theater. Kill ratios improved steadily as crews mastered the complex coordination required. The 2nd Armoured Division reported 1.4 to 1 favourable exchange rates against Panthers during the Rhineland campaign, while the 4th Armoured Division achieved an exceptional 1.8 to 1 ratio during a 3-day engagement near Bastogne. Major General Maurice Rose, commanding the 3rd Armoured Division, summarised the transformation in a February 28th memorandum. The willingness to challenge fundamental doctrine has saved countless American lives. The ability to deliver effective fire while maintaining movement represents the most significant tactical innovation in armoured warfare since the war began. 2 weeks later, Rose would witness his division's tanks using these techniques to penetrate deep into Germany's industrial heartland, out-dueling Panthers that still adhered to increasingly obsolete stationary fire doctrine. February 11th, 1945. Remagen, Germany. The late winter sun glinted off the Sherman tank's olive-drab paint as Sergeant Jim Warrington's command rolled across the muddy field at 14 miles per hour. Through his commander's periscope, he spotted the distinctive angular silhouette of a Panther tank emerging from a tree line 850 yards to the northeast. The German tank commander, clearly visible in his open hatch, was scanning with binoculars, unaware of the American presence. "Panther! 2 o'clock, moving right to left," Warrington called through the intercom. "Driver, maintain speed. Gunner, track with hull." The crucial validation of rolling fire tactics was unfolding in real time. Warrington's tank maintained its forward momentum while the gunner, Private First Class Thomas Monroe, made minute adjustments to the 76mm gun using the enhanced stabilizer system. The improved M4A1 stabilizer now compensated for both vertical pitch and partial horizontal movement, allowing for unprecedented accuracy while moving. "Range 850, APCR loaded," reported Monroe, referring to the tungsten core armor-piercing composite rigid round specifically designed to defeat Panther frontal armor. "Fire when ready," Warrington commanded. The Sherman's gun barked, its muzzle flash momentarily obscuring Warrington's view. Through the clearing smoke, he watched the round strike the Panther's turret junction, precisely at the vulnerable weld point. The German tank stopped abruptly, black smoke pouring from hatches as the crew abandoned their disabled vehicle. The entire engagement had lasted less than 30 seconds, with the Sherman never reducing speed below 12 miles per hour. This encounter represented one of hundreds documented throughout February and March 1945 as American tank units fully implemented rolling fire doctrine. Kill ratios now consistently favored American armor, with the 2nd Armored Division reporting 2.1 German tanks destroyed for each Sherman lost during the Rhineland campaign. The 4th Armored Division achieved even more impressive results, 2.4 to 1 against Panthers, while supporting Patton's drive toward the Rhine. Captain Gerald Roberts of the 737th Tank Battalion conducted detailed analysis of 73 separate tank engagements during this period. His findings quantified the tactical revolution. Sherman crews using rolling fire techniques achieved first-round hits 41% of the time at ranges under 800 yards, compared to 29% for tanks using traditional stationary firing. More significantly, American tanks firing while moving were hit by enemy fire 47% less frequently than those that stopped to shoot. The psychological impact on German panzer crews became increasingly evident through captured documents and prisoner interrogations. Oberleutnant Heinrich Müller, a Panther commander captured near Cologne, explained during debriefing, "We were trained to expect American tanks to halt before firing. Our entire targeting procedure assumed a stationary opponent. When they continued moving while shooting accurately, our gunners became frustrated and rushed their shots. German attempts to adapt proved largely unsuccessful. The Panther's fire control system lacked the hydraulic dampeners and gyroscopic components necessary for effective shooting while moving. When German crews attempted to mimic American tactics, their accuracy dropped to under 12%, making the approach counterproductive." Returning to Sergeant Warrington's unit, The 774th Tank Battalion recorded 8 Panther kills between February 11th and March 7th, 1945, using exclusively rolling fire tactics. Their success rate improved steadily as crews refined their coordination and timing. By early March, they had achieved what tank instructors had declared impossible just 7 months earlier: reliable first-round hits from moving platforms against moving targets. The most dramatic validation came on March 3rd, when 3 Shermans from Warrington's company encountered 5 Panthers near the Erft Canal. Maintaining constant movement in weaving patterns at 8 to 12 miles per hour, the American tanks destroyed 3 Panthers and forced the remaining 2 to retreat, without suffering any losses. Combat footage captured by a Signal Corps photographer showed the Sherman's continuous movement throughout the 4-minute engagement, never presenting stationary targets for the German gunners. Technical analysis later revealed that the Panthers had fired 17 rounds during the encounter, but scored only 1 non-penetrating hit on a Sherman's track guard. By contrast, the 3 American tanks fired 22 rounds and achieved 6 penetrating hits, a hit percentage of 27.3 that proved decisive despite the Panthers' superior armor and gun. General George S. Patton, upon reviewing these results, remarked to his staff, "The perfect tank hasn't been built, but the perfect tactic might have been found. Movement is life." April 20th, 1945, War Department, Washington, D.C. The final statistics lay neatly organized on Major General Gladian Barnes's oak desk. As Chief of Research and Development for Army Ordnance, he had tracked the evolution of American tank combat effectiveness throughout the European campaign. The figures before him told a remarkable story of adaptation and innovation. By war's end, American tanks, employing rolling fire tactics, achieved kill ratios of 2.7 to 1 against German Panthers, a complete reversal from the 0.4 to 1 ratio experienced during the Normandy landings just 11 months earlier. Barnes picked up a technical report detailing the third-generation stabilization system now entering production. The M10 gyroscopic stabilizer provided 3-axis compensation: vertical, horizontal, and rotational, allowing for accurate fire at speeds up to 25 miles per hour. Testing at Aberdeen in March 1945 demonstrated first-round hit probabilities of 67% at ranges up to 1,000 yards while moving at 15 mph. These capabilities would never see combat in Europe, but would influence tank design for decades to come. The doctrinal transformation proved even more significant than the technical developments. Tank crew training manuals dated April 1945 now dedicated 42 pages to moving fire techniques, compared to just 3 paragraphs in the January 1944 editions. The fundamental principles that had governed tank gunnery since 1918 had been completely rewritten in less than a year of combat experience. Sergeant Jim Warrington, now promoted to lieutenant and rotating home with a Silver Star, provided personal testimony to the Army Ground Forces Board in April 1945. Rolling fire changed everything about how we engaged the enemy. German tanks were designed around the assumption that combat would occur between stationary vehicles trading shots from hull-down positions. When we refused to play by those rules, their technical advantages in armor and gun performance became less decisive. Engineering analysis explained why the technique worked despite contradicting conventional wisdom. Dr. Robert McHugh, ballistics specialist at MIT, demonstrated mathematically that a tank moving at constant velocity on level terrain actually provided a more stable firing platform than one that had just come to a halt. When a 35-ton vehicle stops suddenly, McHugh explained in his report, the suspension continues oscillating for approximately 3.8 seconds, creating unpredictable gun displacement. By contrast, a tank moving at steady speed experiences more predictable, rhythmic movement patterns that can be compensated for systematically. The historical significance extended beyond specific engagements. General Omar Bradley later credited the rolling fire innovation with accelerating the Allied advance across Europe by approximately 6 weeks. Our ability to neutralize German armor advantages through tactical adaptation rather than production miracles proved decisive, Bradley wrote in his 1951 memoir. By refusing to engage on terms favorable to the enemy, our tank forces maintained momentum during the critical push to the Rhine. The technical lessons learned transformed post-war tank design worldwide. The Soviet T-54-55 series, first fielded in 1946, incorporated stabilization systems directly influenced by captured American documents. British Centurion tank development prioritized firing on the move capability from its initial design stages. By 1950, virtually every main battle tank in production included some form of gun stabilization system, all tracing their conceptual lineage to those desperate improvisations in the Normandy bocage. The legacy continued into modern warfare. During Operation Desert Storm in 1991, M1A1 Abrams tanks engaged Iraqi T-72s while moving at speeds exceeding 30 miles per hour, achieving hit probabilities above 85% at ranges beyond 2,000 meters. The fundamental concept, maintaining offensive momentum while delivering accurate fire, remained unchanged from what Warrington and his fellow tankers had pioneered 50 years earlier. Combat footage from Desert Storm showed American tanks weaving across the desert at high speed, their 120mm guns remaining steadily trained on target, despite the chassis movement, the direct technological descendants of those first crude gyroscopic systems tested at Aberdeen in 1944. Iraqi tanks, following Soviet doctrine derived from World War II experience, suffered devastating losses when they halted to return fire, creating predictable targets for American gunners. The ultimate validation came from German military historians who studied American tactical innovation. Dr. Hans Meyer of the Bundeswehr Historical Division concluded in his 1978 analysis, "The American adaptation to firing while moving represented one of the most significant tactical innovations in armored warfare history. Without superior tanks or guns, they neutralized German advantages through procedural creativity, demonstrating that doctrinal flexibility often matters more than technical specifications." This lesson, that tactical innovation can overcome technical disadvantage, remains perhaps the most enduring legacy of those tankers who first dared to fire their guns while rolling across the fields of Europe, forever changing the fundamental calculus of armored warfare.